I'm talking now with Larry Del Casale. Larry, you just mentioned that when you're with your students, you said, I'm always talking about Blain with my students. Why don't you elaborate on that?
Oh, God. He would always emphasize practicing. You know, that was, of course, you know, I was just starting out. And one of the stories I always tell when I'm speaking about musicality to students, you know, no matter what they're playing, they should try to make it musical, you know, instead of just playing the notes on the page. So I remember when I was first starting out with Blain, maybe I was a few months in, I said, you know, Professor, I want to develop my own style. Really want to, you know, get my own style of playing, because that's, you know, classical guitarists, you can't differentiate them that much. So I want to have a style. So he looked at me and he went, style? You want a style? He goes, listen to Julian Bream. And when you could play like Julian Bream, then you could find your style.
That's great.
Until then, just imitate John Williams and Julian Bream.
Pretty darn good advice, huh?
That was one story. I mean, I could think of a few more, but
go ahead, start thinking.
The magic pill.
I'm going to stay out of your way.
The magic pill story. I said, man, professor, this passage is so difficult. I don't know what it was, probably a Bach piece or something. And he said, if I had a magic pill, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be rich. I can't give you a pill so you could learn the piece. You got to go home and you got to practice. You got to do the bull work. So he always used to say that. And stories about him and when Bream would come to town, that was Bream come over, we drink over here when he comes, every time he comes to town. I remember once I had to deliver a message because he was either sick or out of town. Bream played in Avery Fisher. He said, you make sure you go to Jewel and you tell him that Blain, Albert said hello and I wish I could be there tonight. So I had to, I said, I have a message for the maestro, like they didn't want to let me in the green room, and they did. And he was so gracious to me, Bream. I remember when I told him about it, I was so happy to hear that, you could see that he really loved the guy, so that was great.
Oh, that's great. Larry, may I interrupt with another Blain Bream story?
Yeah.
This in fact, Blain had told to me. He said when Bream first came to play in New York, which must have been in the 50s or so.
50,
I don't,
58, yeah.
Okay, I don't know the exact date, but Blain said he went to see the concert. I think he had been introduced officially beforehand that Blain would show him around. And so after the concert, Blain introduced himself, told Bream how much he loves the concert, and shall we go out for some drinks? And of course they went out for some drinks and they were drinking, and Blain said, so Julian, I got to tell you, that was a wonderful concert you played tonight. And Blain said, Bream turned to him and said, are all you Americans in the habit of calling total strangers by their first names? But I guess they got on pretty good after that, too.
Yeah. I'm sure Blain just started laughing hysterical and had another drink, And I remember he was motivating as a teacher. He was like from that old school, and you knew you were in the presence of, a war horse from back in the day. And you remember he used to smoke those Chesterfield longs. I remember that. And I would study with him all year round. So I would go to him and being I lived in New York, where it was easy. I would go to him in the summers, and he would be just, rolling out of the shower, getting his cigarettes together. And I hear from the kitchen, he's making his first Ryan and ginger or seltzer and whatever. Come sit down. He had that big desk, and he would sit down and say, let me hear your scales. Let me hear let me hear Sweet Compostolana, the whole suite, So, but it was motivating. It was like you were in this like old world, I don't know. The vibe was very motivating, that he was up here on this pedestal and had played and did so many great things, when I remember when he was at the master class and he met with Segovia, and Williams was in the same one with him. And he would talk about that, and talk about Segovia made him learn a piece overnight, I think it was. He said, I had to go home. He said, was the next day, he's told me, no, don't play that piece, play this one. He says, I was up all night learning the piece, and then I had to play for Segovia in the morning. He says, it went well. He said, but it was a long night. Imagine that.
Mhm, mhm.
you know.
Yeah, but the word that I've been using to describe this approach in so many ways is serious. That
Oh,
it's that you're not messing around here. This is serious business.
yeah.
It's great art. It's got to be love. It's got to be fun. It's got to be wonderful. It's got to be beautiful. But you're not messing around.
No,
You
no,
know.
you had to work. There was like no, I mean, besides the little, his little antics and that's the fun side. But when it came to him listening to you, oh boy, he could be brutal, you know. Go home and practice. That doesn't sound right. You're not doing it right. You're not playing it right. You have no musicality. He'd start chopping you up, and you had to come back the next week with the piece done. So yeah, I remember those days. Another good
Mhm.
story. Blain said, "Tell him to come to my house." I didn't even get on the phone with him. He gave me a time, and I got there. What did I know? I was like 17, 16. I knock on his door, and he opens his door, goes, "Come back in a half hour. I'm teaching." He closes the door on me, and I'm like, "Oh man, this isn't cool." You know, He's come back in a half hour, and the rest is history. I've been with him ever since. Yeah,
Yeah.
he
Wow.
liked
Wow.
me. He took a liking to me, and I loved him. He was like a father figure. So I was talking to a student about Blain, and he shows up with this. And I'm like, oh man, I went through every piece in that book. He always used to complain, Blaine, because they made mistakes. There were mistakes throughout the whole thing, and he was very upset. I mean,
Yeah, he said every time he'd send it back for correction, it would come back with different mistakes.
yeah,
So
it
he
would come.
finally just gave up and
He
said,
gave up.
publish it.
He says it's easier for me. Like every piece, he would walk over with his pencil, and he'd make correction, and whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually was talking with Bill Bay from Mel Bay
Hmm.
Publications
Yeah.
about reproducing 700 years of music for the classic guitar in honor of Blaine's 100th birthday. And
It's a really. Go ahead.
yeah, no, that's fine.
It's a great book. I mean, it's a great little folio. It's got some really good music in it. And I mean, they're all standard repertoire. So it's really cool. I was looking, I said, wow, I didn't realize that I learned that from there. I learned this piece from there. I was like, oh, wow. I didn't have the sheet. I had this book, because he would pull out music, he would give you music sometimes, Blaine. I remember he gave me a copy of Recuerdos. That he had like an extra copy of it, and it wasn't a photocopy, it was the actual music. Copying music back in those days, most people didn't know. You just bought the music because you could. uh we all know what happened to that business,
But even buying the music was a production. You had to find a place that had it in
yeah,
stock.
yeah. Good
And
luck going to Padelson's and Sherman's. They had like very slim pickings.
right. Well, in my day and in Blaine's day, he introduced me to the Spanish Music Center,
Right, that's where you had to go.
which was
Yeah.
on,
The Belvedere Hotel, 48th Street.
there you go,
Yep.
right off Broadway.
That was like falling into a gold mine.
Yeah.
I'll never forget. I went there. Antonio David, I think he had something to do with that place.
No, Gabriel Oyer and his
Yeah, you
wife.
know.
Tony David was at Aranjuez.
Right, right,
At Juan Orozco.
right.
Right next to Padelson's.
Padelson's.
Across from
Right, right.
Carnegie Hall
Stage entrance. Yeah, yeah.
Well, Larry, thanks so much
Yeah.
for spending the time today. I know as I had said before we got started, this could easily be 4 or 5 hours or days or weeks, but for now, we really appreciate your sharing your time and your memories. And
Oh, it was great. It was great talking to you about Blaine, man. It's like he's still here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Hnottavange. I was a student of Albert Valdés Blain from the fall of '74 through the spring of 1980. I first was referred to him by my high school string ensemble teacher, who was giving me some pointers and saw how serious I was about the guitar. He had studied with Albert Valdés Blain. His name was Donald Spaulding. And he said to me, you know, if you're going to be serious about the guitar, you need to go see a serious teacher. And in his mind, that would have been Albert Valdés Blain. So I found myself taking the bus up to New York every week to take my lesson with Mr. Blain. Going to his apartment was, or his, I guess it was his studio apartment, you know, and it was very kind of exciting for me as a youngster. You know, you'd see the Hauser and the Ramirez and the student guitar, you know. I mean, you'd play the student guitar until you earned the right to touch one of those, you know, really nice instruments, you know. But anyway, I liked the man. He had a sort of a gritty flavor about him, so you know, his old style, you know, and I was looking for that. I was looking for somebody a little bit, you know, slightly gruff to study with. I think I had that envisioned in my mind. After a while, I entered Mannes College of Music, and you know, there I was inspired to learn a lot of music because I could see how well some of these more advanced students could play, and I was realizing what I didn't know. And from that, I mean, I'd say, you know, the lessons with Mr. Blain were kind of like, he never really sat next to you, and he more was sitting in his chair out here and sort of watching you almost like an audience, you know what I mean? You'd play, and he'd comment. And from time to time, he'd come over and change a fingering, or, you know, sing a phrase, discuss, you know, musicians you should be listening to understand what that music was about. There was a great emphasis on facility and technical ability. I mean, I think he sort of stressed that, like, if you know, if you don't have any chops, I mean, how are you going to play a piece and, you know, make a strong musical statement? And so, you know, I worked very hard, and I wanted to please him. I wanted his respect, you know. And I think, you know, the other guys that were studying with him too were similar. So anyway, you know, all the way through Mannes, it gets to that last year, and you play your graduation recital, and mine went very well. I was very pleased, being that that was the first full recital I had ever done on the guitar, and you know, I felt like things had paid off, you know. And after that, it was time for me to face life, and you know, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 years later, I went to Arizona to pursue my master's degree under Professor Frank Kuntz. Frank retired a few years back, and while, you know, going through, you know, cleaning out his file cabinets and so on, he called me up and told me he had found the letter of recommendation that Valdés Blain had written on my behalf, and would I like that? And of course I would like that. And so he was nice enough to send it over to me. And you know, in reading that letter, I mean, it really brought back some fond memories. And you know, Mr. Blain had remembered things about me, exactly how long I had studied with him, you know, whether I was at Mannes or whether I was, you know, just studying privately and so on. So it basically, you know, I mean, it warmed my heart, you know, reading all of that. And, you know, I got a snuggly feeling, what can I say, you know? Anyway, you know, all this comes around to this. If Albert Valdés Blain's ghost is floating around right now watching this, I would just say to him, with with deep respect, thank you, Mr. Blain, for everything you did for me. And to you all, walk in peace.
We're speaking now with Laura Oltman about her first classical guitar teacher, Luisa Sanchez de Fuentes. Laura, tell us about how you connected with Miss Fuentes in the first place.
Well, we lived in South Florida, in Fort Lauderdale, and there's a lot of people who fled the Castro regime in like 1962 or so that ended up in South Florida. And this was, early 70s. So my mother saw an ad or an article about this classical guitar studio that had just opened up in the area. And she thought I would probably like the lessons because I had been doing different lessons and not being very happy with them. But I was always playing guitar, but I just didn't like what I was learning. But I wanted to play that song, Classical Gas. And my mom and dad had records and stuff from belonging to a record club, which people used to do back in the old days. And they had, I think, a Julian Bream record and Carlos Montoya that they got because they didn't turn their card back in. So they got the month feature automatically. And so my mom kind of knew what that was, classical guitar, and she thought I would probably like it. So she signed me up for lessons, and the rest is history.
So what town was her studio in? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was in Lighthouse Point.
Which was just a little north of Fort Lauderdale?
North of Pompano. So Pompano is north, and then north of that is Lighthouse Point.
And did she teach other styles, or was this strictly
No.
classical?
No.
And what was special about the way that the let's say the method that she taught, or the approach that she had?
Well, I think like Blain, everybody just did what Segovia did. Although I noticed in the interview that you did with Bruce and Adam, they were talking about using Pascual Roche. And I do know that a lot of people from Cuba studied in Spain. And my teacher studied with Emilio Pujol. And I think also Juan Mercadal, who was from University of Miami, he studied with Pujol in Spain. So a lot of Cuban musicians, guitarists ended up going to Spain at some point to study. And Blain came a lot earlier than Miss Fuentes did. He came long before Castro. So I don't know where he learned, but that Pascual Roche book was big among Cubans teaching in South Florida. And my teacher, Miss Fuentes, she used that book. And Emilia Pujol was a Tárrega protege. So she was into the whole no nails thing. And so was Juan Mercadal. Like, she didn't play with fingernails on her right hand, and neither did Mercadal. So I learned without playing with nails.
And did you stay that way until you went to college to study with Bruce?
Study with Bruce, much to his chagrin.
Well, what was his what was his commentary about your playing without nails?
Oh, that was horrible. It was intolerable. Well, also, when I tried to grow my nails, I didn't really have a very well developed sense of what good tone should be. And my nails are kind of like potato chips. So they're always just a wreck. And I would think, oh, I've got them really long now and they're going to sound great. And I would go in and be like, So,
well, is it possible, you say you didn't have a good sense of tone, but you probably had a good sense of tone without nails from your earlier training.
Well, it is just a different sound, and not a bad one either. But one thing the no nails crowd emphasized a lot was rest stroke. So and Blain as well. And Miss Fuentes is like, everything's a rest stroke unless you can't do it that way. Like if there's a reason you cannot play a rest stroke, then everything should be a rest stroke. And that's a very flamenco thing too, I think. People who play flamenco play everything that they can play with rest strokes, including the thumb. So that was definitely part of her style. But I also think that goes to Segovia playing without amplification too, that it was a big deal. Like when we were young, Segovia was the guy, and he steadfastly would refuse to amplify the guitar no matter how big the venue. So he tried to play loud. And I think he also used a lot of rest stroke to get a bigger sound in big halls.
Sure.
So that was part of the idea.
Mm-hmm. What about performing? Did she emphasize that at all in your formative years? Or was it more just getting the technique, learning the repertory?
Well, I'm getting the technique. I started with some background. I had taken some lessons and just, I could read music on the guitar when I started with her. And I could play guitar. I played for a long time by the time I took lessons with her. So it was just learning classical technique, like the right hand stuff. But I would say she wasn't a technique freak. Like she was all about music. And I think she wanted to hear something good at the lessons. Like she didn't want to hear crappy pieces she didn't like. So sometimes she would probably pick pieces that might have been a little difficult or hard for me to really understand. But you have to learn this stuff, like Villa Lobos music. It's hard for like a little kid to get it, who's from North America, knows nothing about Brazil. But she was really good on the Turechek kind of repertoire, the really romantic, the Segovia repertoire. She was very good on that, on teaching you like how to play it, like what it should sound like and how much freedom it should have.
Mm-hmm. I know that as a result of working with her, you were introduced to the concept of being in a guitar duo, something that seems to have stuck with you much of your life.
This is true because she set me up with this other student, Phil Sanzone, who he was older than me, but not crazy older. But he was really, really into guitar. And we did duets. So I learned a lot of duet, like repertoire when I was a teenager. And she didn't think it was appropriate for a woman to have a career like as a soloist. And her idol was Ida Presti. And she kind of looked like Ida Presti, but she really admired Ida Presti. But, she played a duo, which was an appropriate way for a woman to concertize. And so I think she encouraged me to play with this other person, Phil. He was a guy, but she encouraged me to play with him in a duo because she thought that was, like you can't just go out and be on stage all by yourself. So I mean, I did like to do it though. I mean, I enjoyed it a lot, and so I knew a lot of music to play with other people. I learned a lot of duo music. I think that's probably partly how we ended up playing together, because I had already gotten a foot in the door.
Right. What did she tell you about her life in Cuba before she came to the US? Because she did come as a fairly young person, didn't she?
Yeah, but she wasn't like I think she was like a teenager, not a child. I mean, she had a whole career going in Cuba. What she told us was that, and like I can never verify any of this, but her father is her grandfather was Eduardo Sanchez de Fuentes, who wrote a lot. He was a composer from Cuba who wrote a lot of songs, probably kind of on the order of Manuel Ponce, but Cuban songs, and a lot of Cuban emigres knew his music. And she was, as a really young person, going to school at this conservatory in Havana, and her family was, because of Eduardo Sanchez de Fuentes, they were associated with it, and Segovia knew their family. So if he came to Cuba, she would, meet him. And in her biography, like she had a lot of like early, very big accomplishments in her musical career in Cuba. But when she came to the US, she ended up for a while in Chicago before she moved to Florida. And she was connected with Jim Sherry, Sherry Brenner Guitars, who sold all the Ramirez. He was the Ramirez dealer in the US. Notice how I say Ramirez, because she would make fun of me for saying Ramirez. Not a mirror, it's not mirror, it's Ramirez. So he told me that she had been offered probably some kind of apprenticeship, but some kind of chance to sing at Chicago Lyric Opera, and she was a really good singer.
Oh, you mean Jim Sherry told you that?
Yeah,
Oh.
He told me that. But she ended up wanting to be a guitarist more than I don't know. I don't know why she didn't do that, actually. I don't know, because she didn't tell me that, but he did. And he said she was a really good singer, really, I mean, very good. So I can vouch for the fact that she was a good singer, but I think she did continue with that. Like she conducted some choir at a church in Lighthouse Point. And I think, she was involved with church music a lot. So I think she kept singing.
And we did read after she passed in February of this year that she had been very active with a university there, with their prep school, doing a lot of training with young people and doing a lot of the administrative work there as well.
When I studied with her, she taught at Florida Atlantic University. But what's the name of that school? I'm forgetting, but it's a relatively new school that has a pretty good conservatory. And I know she was directing the prep, and she was teaching and directing their prep school. And she had, I think, started out maybe as an administrator at the conservatory, but she did teach there too.
So the school where she was working with the prep department, that was in South Florida as well, right?
Yeah, it was Lynn University. I think
Okay.
Boca Raton or West Palm Beach, north of Lighthouse Point.
Okay. I wanted to ask you also about after you left South Florida to go to Tallahassee to study and then on to New York for graduate studies and then your career. Did you stay in touch with her over the years?
I didn't. I mean, she was not easy to stay in touch with. Let me just put it that way. But I did more recently get back in touch with her, and I can't remember. I think it might have been one of my mom's friends wrote and said something about her teaching at Lynn University, and I did write to her there, and she wrote back. And I sent her that Cantos de España record that we did because I thought she would like it. But I'm going to read an excerpt from a little story I contributed to Ms. Fuentes' memorial recently. One of the strongest memories I have of studying guitar with Ms. Fuentes was the cultural chasm between us. I had virtually no exposure to Spanish or Cuban culture. I think Ms. Fuentes' strength as a teacher, at least for me, was imparting such a fine-grained appreciation of the music of Spain in particular, and the style of performance of late romantic works associated with composers like Francisco Tárrega. Ms. Fuentes also respected the repertoire and instrument in a way that Americans don't. She made me feel like a career in the arts was a perfectly respectable and even desirable aspiration. She gave me a couple of little gifts that I still have. One was a pin made with lots of chips of colored glass in the shape of a small guitar. The other was a miniature set of swords from the city of Toledo in Spain. She told me that the best steel for swords was produced in the city of Toledo. At one point, I was studying some preludes by the Brazilian composer Heitor Villa-Lobos, and I just did not understand these pieces. I recall her saying that I would probably like that music better if I were older, which was accurate. She said it was an acquired taste, like wine, and that you may not like it that much at first, but you learn to appreciate it after drinking it for a while. I remember on one occasion, she organized a field trip for some students to go to Miami-Dade Auditorium to see Andres Segovia play. I was 16 years old. We went backstage and met the maestro briefly. Ms. Fuentes said that her family had been friends with Segovia and always saw him when he came to Cuba. After the concert, we went to a Spanish restaurant and Ms. Fuentes thought we should all try a little bit of sangria just for the cultural experience. One glass and I'm sure I was hammered. The whole evening seemed incredibly adult to me at the time and very much outside of my typical high school experiences. I have enormous admiration for Ms. Fuentes' success in carving out a career as a musician in a foreign country, first as a woman and then as a woman by herself. As a teacher, she definitely demanded a certain amount of respect, something that students in the US don't always understand, and something I didn't always know how to show. Now that I'm vastly more experienced in life, I see her behavior more as part of our cultural mismatch. But I also now believe that her self-respect probably served her well in her situation of frequently being on her own in the world. It is an honor to celebrate her life and remember gratefully the profound contribution she made to my own life.
Pay tribute to Albert Blain. Keep the introduction short. I'm going to try to comply with this request. But how can you be short in your description of someone who has influenced the life so completely? When I met Albert, I was 17 years old. It was 1974. And when my then current guitar teacher heard with whom I would be studying, he made the following statement. He can be a mean old man, but whatever he tells you to do, just do it. I look back now and laugh because he was a decade younger than I am now, maybe more. I wish I was that young again, as he was when he was called a mean old man. Was he a mean old man? Was he a mean man at all? No. He could be very, very forthright, and if he knew something was correct, he was not going to let you tell him it wasn't. With that said, though, when my father was passing away, he was one of the kindest and gentlest human beings I've ever known. To say I looked up to him as a second father would be probably close to the mark. I remember him giving me this piece of advice once. He said, Tárrega didn't become famous playing other composers' works when I had said to him that I wished to write music. He did say, however, make sure that whatever you write is good. Well, I'm still working on that. So the pieces I am putting into this little tribute video are a couple pieces that I wrote because he inspired me to write. And harking back to Tárrega, you didn't call him Tárrega twice in Blain's presence. Anyway, it's his 100th birthday. I can't believe that much time has gone by. And wherever he is, I wish him a very happy because he was a great guy. Thanks for giving me this opportunity.
You are so good to me, Andy. I love you.
We're talking today with Dennis Turechek, who has been a friend for probably about half a century, and was a friend, colleague, and student of Albert Valdés Blain for many, many years. Dennis, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's good to see you.
And
Yes, I was, I think it was 1965 when I first went to Albert. And I had been kind of a jazz guitar player up to that point, and I fell in love with the sound of classical guitar somewhere in my early 20s. And so I was a rank beginner in my 20s when I went to Albert. And consequently, I studied with him for 9 years. And that is, I hope, the reason that it took me that long to feel relatively competent on the instrument.
yeah, and was that all on West 13th Street in Greenwich Village?
You know, I was trying to remember. I believe he had an apartment in the village on 12th or 11th before he got to 13th. And I seem to recall there was a move that took place. I know that even before that, he had a studio, I think, over on the east side, kind of maybe in the 80s or 70s,
Wow.
I believe.
Uh-huh.
But I'm very hazy on that because that was before my time.
Well, I remember his parents lived on the Upper West Side
Well, they did.
In a high rise on Columbus Avenue.
Yeah. Mhm. I think Gene Bertoncini, for example, we had him up here one time, and he mentioned that he used to take lessons with Albert, but it was over, it was over in the east side somewhere. So that was prior to the 13th. But my main experience is the 13th Street apartment, and I remember getting off the elevator, walking down the hall, and I'd hear this beautiful, clean tremolo on a recuerdos or some such. And I knew it was John Varner because I'd heard him play, but I could just hear it down the hallway and I could recognize who that was.
Wait, say the name again, who it was?
John Varner. He may have
Oh.
been slightly before your time. He was from New Jersey. He was one of the first certified guitar teachers in New Jersey, I believe, on classical guitar in any case. But he had a beautiful tremolo.
Mm.
And then, of course, later on, I remember walking down the hall and hearing this very rhythmic and robust Sevilla, and I figured, oh, that's got to be Leo Rivera.
Yeah.
I've heard him play. Yeah, that's him. And those experiences are, they've stuck in my mind. I can even remember hearing, this might embarrass you, but hearing a very strong chaconne coming from the behind the door. And that was Michael Newman, it turned out. I didn't know at the time, but that was Michael Newman.
Wow. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, it's a long time ago, but
you mentioned Leo Rivera. I saw him at Luthier Music on West 44th Street. Oof, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 years ago now. And I hadn't seen him in probably 20 plus years, 30 years before.
Wow. Yeah, I really liked Leo. He was he was a very, very interesting player. But and then of course all of these, Leon Atkinson was there during this period. In fact, Leon was kind of instrumental in getting me to teach at Jersey City State College because that's where he was teaching at the time.
Right.
And I say it was really Albert was really the moving force behind that. And in fact, you know, virtually every job I had in New York came from Albert, either directly or indirectly, and including, you know, performances, playing jobs, etc. And the thing that sticks out in my mind about Albert was that he was able to create a guitar. What's the word? A guitar. Don't want to use the word venue, but he created this culture, really, and he did it because it wasn't just that he stayed in his apartment and he taught, you know, with considerable skill, many students who came through, but he was working on it from all, you know, all aspects that requires, if you're going to have a guitar culture, you need to have all these things. And so he was encouraging guitar makers. I remember Fred Dickens at the apartment on a number of occasions.
And of course, Manuel Velasquez was.
Yeah, well, that was my first guitar. That was my first guitar on 23rd Street. I bought that, and that was the very first guitar I had, and it served me well.
Hey, can I show you something?
Yes.
Hold on one second. Don't go away.
I won't.
You know, I wasn't sure if I'd have the opportunity to get this into this event, but you mentioned Julio Prol, you mentioned all this old time stuff. This is a poster from a concert at the Greenwich Muse Spanish Theater, which was in a church on West 13th Street, next door to Spain Restaurant.
Yeah.
And notice it says, Concierto de Guitarra de los Maestros Julio Prol y Alberto Valdés Blain. So they actually weren't playing, but they were the teachers with their disciples, Michael Newman and Mateo Caballero.
Oh, my goodness.
And so this was actually my first public concert. There was not a full concert other than at school. And this was Sunday, March 26, 1972.
Wow.
At 4:30 p.m.
Oh my goodness.
And there it is, West 13th Street.
Yeah.
Still in pretty good shape.
That is incredible.
But you know, the funny thing is, I studied with Albert from 1971 to 1979 on 13th Street. He had been at Montparnasse, and then he moved across the street, and then he moved back to Montparnasse. And I always thought of that as this faraway place, this Greenwich Village, because I'm basically a country hick from New Jersey, even though I was born in Brooklyn. And Manus, where I went to school, was the Upper East Side. I lived on the Upper West Side. So it was a big schlep to get down to 13th Street. Not as big a schlep as from New Jersey when I was in high school. But, you know, he was always down there in the village. And then about 6 years ago, Manus had moved from the East Side to the West Side. And then the new school decided it was time to bring Manus fully into the fold. So we were brought to new school facilities on 13th Street. And so the new Manus is about 5 doors down from Montparnasse building, where I was every Saturday through high school, and then every Wednesday, I think it was, throughout college. Wow. Coming down there to see Blain, and now every day when it's not a pandemic that I go to New York, I'm back in the old neighborhood, and I usually walk past the church that had the Greenwich Muse Theater. Laura and I went to Spain Restaurant a couple of years ago, for old time's sake.
Yeah,
I think it was the same waiters there from about 40 years ago, 45, 50 years ago.
Yeah, paella.
Yes, and the same furniture.
Um,
And the food was okay, you know, it wasn't incredible, but the atmosphere was beyond belief.
yeah, yeah,
So you were really starting classical technique from scratch with
correct.
Blain.
Yeah.
And what kind of methods did he have you working from?
Oh, we started with Carulli, Carcazzi, Soar, and then, some, uh, by that time, Villalobos etudes and a few of them, not the hardest ones, and Bach and Renaissance music, the usual repertoire like that. But the studies were more. He seemed to rely, especially for people like me who needed a lot of drill,
Sure.
a lot of Carcazzi and a lot of Carulli and Carcazzi and so on. And
Had he published his book,
yes,
700 Years of Guitar, by then?
he published it he hadn't published it when I started, but I don't believe. Well, he might have, because I went there in 65. If you look on the publication date of his book, it probably would be about 65.
Well, it's funny you should mention that. Hang on another second.
You have a copy right there? Aha, you do. You do indeed.
This one is actually Laura's copy. You know, Laura studied with Bruce Holzman
Yep.
at Florida State after her studies with Luisa Sanchez de Fuentes in Fort Lauderdale.
Ah,
And so Bruce, had his students doing the same things that Blain had his students doing.
Yeah.
Copyright 1967.
okay.
So this is
So
that
he-
700 years of music for the classic guitar.
Yep. I've certainly been through that book.
And I remember one
Right.
thing Blain told me once when I was working on this, the first piece, Come With Me, My Giselle.
Right.
And he said something like, oh yeah, there's no guitar music in the 1200s. I wrote that one.
That's right. That's what I know that.
But I'm pretty sure the Dowland is really Dowland and the Bach and the
Yes.
Soar and the top.
Yes. He just needed something, the title 700 years to fulfill that obligation.
This was his inscription.
Ah,
Of course, when I was a student, I never had the presence of mind to ask my teachers for their autographs or for photos or anything like that.
right.
Well,
Well-
there were so many people that came through those doors. I think Bruce said at one point he was teaching 60 hours a week.
Wow.
When I knew him, he was winding down a little. He was doing 45 hours a week.
Yeah.
Those 6
Yeah.
days a week. So,
Oh, I know.
it's just amazing the number of people and the quality of the playing, and the seriousness about
Yeah.
the instrument.
Yeah, that to me, again, it was that he understood that for this guitar culture to flourish, you needed to have a high bar. You need to be serious. You couldn't compromise. And also, as I mentioned before, cultivating guitar making. He encouraged composers. He encouraged me to compose.
Yeah, I
mean,
was going to ask about that.
yeah. I took it to mean, yeah, your playing is okay, but you might want to step up the composing. But I saw that, and I saw that that kind of spirit of let's get all the wheels turning, let's get everybody working together, and that's really why he was so successful, I believe.
Yeah. Well, that whole tradition of guitar composers, goes back to the beginning. But guess what? So does violin composers
That's
and
right.
piano composers.
That's right. That's right.
It's just we have the guitar, and that's our voice.
Yeah.
That's our instrument, our tool for creating
Yeah.
music.
Yeah.
But I remember him sharing your music with me fairly early on.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, that and that the theme and variations was one
Oh,
that was a particular
okay.
favorite.
I didn't know he had it. Huh. Wow.
I would bet almost anything that's where I got it.
Yeah, yeah.
So he was able to help connect you in the guitar world, well, the music world
In the
of New
music
York
world.
City.
Exactly. The music world. Yeah. And I mean, that was putting he was putting it was very uplifting because he was putting his faith in my ability
Mhm.
to read this music and perform it on a level that would be acceptable to, whatever the occasion was. And so it really, it really helps a person's confidence in that stage of the game,
Oh yeah.
you know, because you don't really know. You you can have a lot of fantasies about how you're playing, but you don't really find that out until you get out there and play.
Yeah.
And
Here's a question about your teaching,
yeah,
because even while you were a student, I guess you started teaching at
yes,
Jersey
yes.
City State, now known as New Jersey City University.
So I've
And
heard, yeah, yeah.
and the new head of the department there is Celil Refik Kaya,
Oh,
the Turkish
whoa,
guitarist, so who's a student of
wow.
mine. So
He's a
there's
killer.
that Blain tradition
Yeah.
continuing on at
Oh,
at New
yeah.
Jersey City University.
Amazing.
Well, I guess that's probably something I learned from Blaine, because I don't
Mm,
remember, now that you mention it, I don't remember playing a concert anywhere in the New York area that he wasn't at.
that he was, yep,
And he
yep,
certainly didn't drive, so he would have to arrange for transportation to come
yeah,
out to Long Island, up to Westchester, out to New Jersey.
yeah.
But he was there. He was always
That's
there.
that's a wonderful lesson in life for sure. Uh, that's how that's how these things grow. You know, it's just it's you provide fertile ground, and then you have to believe in it. You have to support it. And you prove that you believe in it by showing up.
Yeah.
That's how it is.
Yeah.
So, and he certainly was a very generous soul.
Yeah.
I had this letter from him, I think less than a year before he died. He was in Alicante. He told about in his letter how and why he decided to leave. And apparently his apartment had gone co-op, and some speculator bought his apartment.
Oh, no
And
kidding. I didn't
yeah,
realize that.
yeah, and he couldn't evict him because by that time Albert had become a senior citizen, but he could harass him. And that's all he did. He just enjoyed harassing. And finally, in 83, I believe, he visited Madrid because he loved Madrid. And he thought, well, I'm going to have to just give it up. I'm tired already, 40 years of performing and teaching and all that. So he made a trip to Madrid, and it wasn't the Madrid of the 1950s when he first visited. So it had grown from 1 million to 4 million, and that when he was there, he got mugged,
Oh.
and it was dirty, and they were building skyscrapers, like the World Trade Center, and so he had some friends there, and they said, well, you really ought to check out Alicante.
Mhm.
So he said, okay. So that's what he did. And he arrived there. He left Madrid. It was rainy and miserable. He arrived at Alicante and the sun was shining. The beautiful mountains. It's a city of about 300,000.
Right on the coast.
Right on the coast, right on the Mediterranean, with the mountain in between the mountains and the Mediterranean. And palm trees were, ripe and everything was beautiful. And he said he had this experience that he had arrived home,
Mhm.
and that was the first time he'd experienced it. And that's how he wound up in Alicante.
Welcome everybody to Bruce Holzman and Adam Holzman. Adam is somewhere far away, Bruce is somewhere farther away, and they're going to share some thoughts about their lives with Albert Valdés Blain for many, many years in New York City. Okay, gentlemen, start sharing.
Okay.
Bruce, you're the oldest of everybody we know here pretty much.
Thank you.
So could you tell us about how you first met Blain, how that experience happened?
Well, actually, when I went to when I went to Bronx Community College in 1968, I was studying with Rodrigo Riera at the same time. And the school mandated that I study with Al because Al was their teacher. I was studying with Rodrigo privately. So that's really how I met him. So I called him up and I said, I'm one of your students. And he said, what took you so long to call me? And I said, I'm a little slow. And that's how I started lessons with him. And one of the memories that I always have about that concerns you, because for a certain time, your lesson was right before mine. And I would come out of the elevator in the corridor, leading to his apartment. And I hear this guy blasting out down the hallway. And it was you with ponytail. And yeah. And I'll never forget that. I said, who's that blasting like that on that Hauser? And that was that 14-year-old guy. How much younger are you than me?
I was born in 57.
Okay. So that was that 63-year-old guy who at the time was, wow, you were like 13 or something.
That's when I first started, yeah, in the early 70s. I think 71 was my first year.
And I also remember Adam when he was studying with Al, and I remember him tearing up Carcassi 25 because Al had him playing it like over and over and over, like all the time, which is a fantastic study because it sounds like Paganini anyway. And but he could just play the dickens at him. And when I would come home from here and I hear him practicing, and he was practicing that, and it sounded incredible. And that's when he was studying with Al. So there's a couple of Al memories for you.
Were you responsible for encouraging Adam to study with him as well?
What do you think, guys?
Well, Bruce was my teacher from 67/68. There's always a controversy in the family whether I started at 7 or 8. I don't really remember. Mom and Bruce would always discuss that.
7.
Bruce says 7. I trust him. He was my first teacher. So I started with Bruce in 67. I don't get to say this too often, but I am the youngest guy here, and that's nice, just being in the room. And I started in 67 with Bruce. And then when Bruce went to Florida State, when he was 22 in 72, that's when Mom and Dad, really, there wasn't any question of going to any other teacher. And that was just sort of the natural next place to go. And I remember the funny thing, because Bruce just referenced you in that, Mike, some of my earliest memories were, and I don't know if you remember this, but your lesson was before mine. And so I would come at the end of your lesson and sit in on some of it. when you were about 16, I remember you were getting ready to play your Manus recitals and stuff like that, and your New York recitals. And from 16, 17, 18 for you, I used to come early and listen to like the last 20 minutes or 15 minutes of your lesson. I always remember that. So from the time I was very young. So those are I started at 12 when Bruce went to Florida State. That's when I started with Al. And I mean, I have, many different memories, but my early ones are really that I used to, mom or dad used to bring me on Saturday afternoon, sometimes kicking and screaming because I didn't always want to go to my lesson. And Al, I remember, he was a tough taskmaster. Every lesson started with slurs and with Pasquale Roche slurs, and always in first position, which was a nightmare because I had small hands, and scales and different etudes all the time, and every lesson. And I'm grateful, and I do that now with my students. Those were the basic blocking and tackling of playing, arpeggio, scales, and slurs. So
yeah. Bruce, when you were first working on repertory with Blain, what music did he want you to work on? And was it stuff that you were happy to do, or was there other music that you wanted to do that just wasn't his preference?
Well, I guess it's okay for me to say this kind of thing now, but I just said before that I was studying with Riera and Blain at the same time. And Al did not like Rodrigo, but he did not know that I was studying with him. For a whole year, he did not know. And Rodrigo would give me pieces to learn, or would suggest pieces to learn. And because I had 2 lessons a week, I had one lesson with one of them and one lesson with the other one. But neither knew that I was studying with either one. I never told. I'd be a great spy because but so I think the pieces were coming from Rodrigo that he was suggesting that I do, and I would take them to Al, and Al was fine with them. And when Rodrigo would show me some musical nuances or something to do with the music, Al would say, "Wow, that's great, beautiful, do that."
sounds just like Rodrigo.
Yeah, and I always thought how funny that was, because he was also, in the same breath, if I'd have said it, he never liked Rodrigo. I mean, he would I heard him say that, but he didn't know. So it was a kind of an interesting thing. So repertoire, I suppose, Taroba Sonatina, Tedesco Sonata, Chaconne, Tedesco Concerto, the D major one, Vivaldi Concerto.
Very much Segovia repertory.
Yeah, that's right. I suppose that's true. Ponce this and that.
And of course, that was his great expertise as well.
Yeah.
Did either of you hear the recording that he had on an old reel-to-reel tape of him playing?
I never have. Mark Del Priora always threatens to play that for me.
Oh,
but I don't
he's
think he
got
ever
it.
has. Mark
Oh.
is sort of the keeper of all things Al and Rolando Blain. And he has talked to me about that over this. Oh, you have it, Bruce?
I have vinyl of Rolando.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, every time I'm in New York and Mark and I have lunch or something, or we chat on email, he's always saying, "I've got this old, video, not video, audio recording. I don't remember if it's vinyl or tape, but he has duo recordings of the brothers, and he has solo recordings of, I think, both. I don't want to say. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But Mark's the keeper of that stuff.
All right. Well, that duo, my understanding was the first classical guitar duo to play at Carnegie Recital Hall in 1941. So
Wow.
Albert would have been 19 or 20 at the time. And that was a pretty big deal back then. Yeah. I Yeah, Bruce.
I just want to say, we're talking about Al teaching. Don't forget, there was this point at which Al was teaching 10 hours a day,
Right.
6 days a week.
Yeah.
He had 60 students.
Yeah.
At what that I can remember very clearly, because he was teaching for, I think, 5 schools at the same.
Well, I got him at Queens College. He was not on the faculty at Queens College. I was the first guitar student there. Joanne Folletta was there, but she was not there as a guitar student in those days. And when I went there, I think it was Bill Andrews was on the faculty. I think that's what his name was. I might be getting that wrong.
Bill Matthews.
Bill Matthews was, that's it, Mike. Bill Matthews was on the faculty, and I said to them, listen, I study with Al Blain, and he's connected to all the other city universities, and they hired Al out at Queens College because of that. So he taught everywhere in those days,
Yeah.
Plus all the private students.
Right.
I mean, he didn't leave that apartment until he went to have dinner in Spain. I mean,
Right.
he was in it.
Yeah. So some people would say his style would focus more on the technique than the music, but I think he was always listening to the music, and the end goal, there was no question, was a musical performance. He just had a different priority at the time, and it seems like for all of us, at the time that we were studying with him, that development of the technique was the most important thing. You could be the most musical person in the world, but if you can't string 2 notes together, hell of a lot of good that does.
Good for you.
Right. No,
Well,
absolutely.
I mean, and this is,
I'm sorry, Mike, go ahead.
no, it's yours, Adam.
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, each teacher brings their own style of how in their hierarchy of what's important to the playing. And, I think Al's served most of us incredibly well, his hierarchy. And again, of course, we were all at different levels. I was, well, you started with Al also when you were young, Mike, but Bruce was already a more advanced player at that point. I was, 12. So how advanced could I be, And so, I mean, I've been playing for a while and I could play, but, Al, was always talking about being more expressive and, doing more vibrato and doing more color and doing more things. And, I was a kid. I didn't always know what those things meant, but he certainly made an impression on me in so many ways. One of the other things that, and we haven't mentioned this, but one of the other things that I learned from Al that has affected me that every day of my playing was I would walk into his house, and I know you guys had this experience, and he'd say, which guitar do you want to play today? And I'd either play a Hauser, Hauser 1 or a Hauser 2, or a Ramirez that like Segovia had picked out. And I created this, I fell in love with the sound of these great guitars. And now I'm embarrassed to say how many guitars I own, but very much of that comes from that youthful experience of enjoying and appreciating the voices of different instruments, and how Al would talk about the provenance of the instruments or their importance and their importance in the history of the lore and of the guitar and of the music. And I share that with my students all the time, when you're playing a Santos Hernandez, or you're playing a Jose Ramirez 1, or you're playing a Hauser. What does that mean? Where does this guitar come from? Where's its divinity, as it were? Where's its life? And I think that I know for me, that's something that I will take to my grave, that I really got in Al's apartment from Al, and it's precious for me.
Mm-hmm. I started studying with Blain Columbus Day of 1971. A friend of mine out in New Jersey who was an adult, who was a school teacher, a Spanish teacher, a guy named Fred Dilzell from Madison, New Jersey. We were friends through the Flemington Guitar Society that met in the barber shop of Augie Loprinzi,
Augie,
Flemington, New Jersey.
Augie was in, I remember Augie and I were in Tampa together. That's amazing.
Yes, and he became a great luthier. He was just starting to make guitars in the back of his barber shop. And that's where we started meeting. This was fall of 1967. So I was studying at the time with Thomas Anthony in Plainfield, New Jersey, who's a fine guitarist, jazz guitarist, bass player. He's in Maryland now, still around, just retired from teaching at Washington College. And after about 4 years studying with Tom, he suggested that I might be looking for someone who was at the next level, more connected in the New York scene. And so I took one lesson with Alexander Bello, which was okay. And I took one lesson with Tom Anthony's brother-in-law, Harry Leahy, the great jazz guitarist. And my mind exploded instantly. He wanted me to learn about 30 different C major scales and chord progressions in the first week. And I was like, this is great. It's just not for me. Show me the notes and I'll figure out what to do with them. But I just wasn't a jazzer. So Fred said, I'm going to my lesson. I had that Monday off from school and I listened to the lesson and I was like, this is pretty serious stuff. And at the end of Fred's lesson, Blain asked me to play something and I don't remember what it was, but I played and he said, do you want to come back for a lesson? And I said, sure. And he said, okay, bring me the first 10 source studies and Villa-Lobos Preludes 1 and 2. I was like, okay, because I was 13 at the time and, didn't know any better. And I went home and I learned all that stuff. And I came back, I think I knew already a few of the source studies. And I came back the following week and the whole lesson was playing all of that. And he would make some comments and then said, okay, so for next week, learn 5 more source studies and the next 2 Villa-Lobos Preludes. And this went on for a really long time. And I would say just that level of intensity in learning music was incredibly important to me. Now I'll spend 3-4 months on a page, but doing it like that, we would just fly through repertory. And then I play at one concert and then start over. So I basically never had anything to play except once every few months, but I'd learned all this music. And one week, I just didn't have a chance to practice at school. And it was very intense. I think it was like sophomore year in high school. And I came to my lesson and he said, okay, show me what you've worked on. And I said, well, Albert, I'm sorry. I just didn't learn all the things that I was supposed to. He said, okay, well, make sure you do it for next week. Play me what you had before. I was like, that's it? I thought he was going to kill me on the spot. So but then the spell was broken and then I became a lazy Slav after that. But for those first few years, his encouragement to really plow through that music was so influential.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask if either of you remembered the recitals that Blain would have for his students.
Mike, I was one of my earliest, in fact, my earliest memory of being nervous, other than of our other brother, Greg, going to beat me up somewhere, was of the first time we had one of the student recitals at Al's house. And I was either 12 or 13. And I can't tell you what I was going to play. It was probably a source study or a series of Carcassi studies or something like that at the time. But my first memories of being nervous were about that. I guess it was a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. I can't remember now. But I was so scared of that. It was what, Bruce?
Sunday.
Sunday. And that was my first sort of, I guess, real playing in the living room for somebody performance. And I remember it was I don't even know if Harry Pellegrin was there. I see Harry sometimes. I know you guys know Harry, lives, south of here in upstate New York. And I remember last time I was playing up there, he said something to me he said, I think I saw you when you were 12 at Al's house. And I said to him, oh, I remember that. It was the most nervous I had ever been in my life. And that feeling of what that felt like has stuck with me all these years. And it was funny, I can't remember what I played though. That I don't remember, but I remember the feeling in my gut.
Yeah, I was probably there for at least one of those that you did.
Yeah.
And this was the time when Anton Pavlovsky was studying with him, Dennis Turechek, who we'll hear from. Anton's no longer with us. Don Witter's no longer with us.
Was Obed Diaz there then? Remember Obed? Or was he a little later?
Might have been a little bit later.
Okay.
Yeah, but Harry was kind of the next generation at Manus. I don't think we were in the same class. I think he was a little past me. I mean, maybe.
I think Harry's a little older than Bruce, if I'm not mistaken.
No. Nobody's older than Bruce. I'm sorry. You're mistaken.
No, but I have always these warm memories of Al. I mean, I think our relationship with the instrument and our relationship with those teachers that make an impression on us, I think, is very powerful and lasting. And I think Al was certainly. I know Al was one of those people for me. I always tell people that I had 4 teachers in my life: my brother, Alberto Valdés Blain, Oscar, and Elliot. Those are I consider my 4 teachers. I took master classes with many people, but those are my 4 teachers, and how each of them influenced me is different, and I think that's been a great growth. It was part of a great growth experience for me.
And I don't need to remind everybody, this is what rubs off on all of your students, and now all of your students,
Sure.
and your students, and we can just go right down the list of all the people who were involved in the guitar seminar this year. And you see someone like Dragos, who has been an Adam student, and Laura, who's been a Bruce student, and Jalil, who's been a Michael and an Adam student. So he was getting the double dose of Blain by osmosis. So it continues for sure. Bruce, any closing comments?
I think for a while I must have had the last lesson of the day with Al. So that was the pre-Spain and the drink lesson. And he would always invite me and take me there and offer me a drink, because he drank real stuff. Oh yeah, wow, that brought back a story. So I always had that, I have that memory really clearly of going to Spain with him, the restaurant. And but I just remembered when I said that I met him in Alicante once, and we had dinner together, and he drank a whole bottle of wine. And I remember thinking, if I drank as much as he had drunk, it was more than that, I would have been like in a stretcher. They would have carried me out to the hospital. And he hobbled out of the restaurant after all that. But yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that's when he had moved to Spain. But yeah, so there are a lot of fond memories.
Also, Michael, I think, for Bruce and I, our dad loved Alberto. I mean, he really loved him. And I always kind of felt that they were sort of like brothers from another mother. And I can't remember how many times on the subway home, because my father, when I was in high school, our father would meet me at my lessons. So the only days our dad would ever leave work early would be to come and watch my lessons on Friday afternoon. So I'd walk over from Stuyvesant, or I'd take the crosstown train if it was too wet and rainy. And Dad would meet me, and then we'd go home together. And Dad would spend a lot of time on the subway sort of deciphering Al in some ways for me, not about the music part, but just sort of the warmth, the cultural differences, just the relationship. It was really kind of cool. As I look back on it, it was really wonderful.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, but Dad really loved Al, and that, I think, added to the support. I mean, our parents were always incredibly supportive of what we did. We didn't need that, and that was always there. It was incredible. But his relationship with Al, for my dad, it was a really relaxed time. He loved coming to the lessons. He came to everyone unless he just couldn't. And then we would go home together on the subway. And it was really, and sometimes he'd give me grief because I wasn't as prepared as I should have been. Sometimes my dad would give me more grief than Al gave me, and quite a bit. And I'd hear about it the whole ride home. And so it's sort of together in a way, there was a team teaching going on and for a lot of those years,
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Our fathers were very similar in that regard. Anytime I would be at home practicing and make a mistake, my dad would echo the Blain admonition, careful. It's like any imperfection, careful. And when Blain did it, I was like, yeah, I know. And when my dad did it, I was like, leave me alone, just let me practice. But that's because he was my father. But when I gave my Carnegie Recital Hall debut, this was in the really old days when you could smoke in concert halls.
I was there.
Oh my God. There was a lounge up in the back of the balcony, a smoking lounge. And my father and Blain were both in there, I was told afterwards. Blain had plenty to drink. My father was on tranquilizers of some sort. And they spent my whole concert smoking. They were so nervous. Just like chain smoking right through it. And I was just down there, la, la, la. But when you're 16, you don't worry about these things.
Well, I was at that concert, and it was great. It was great. And I'm going to share one more memory because it was with our dad and with you, Michael. At your Manus graduate, it was some concert you gave at Manus. I don't know if it was your graduation recital, but it was a concert you gave at Manus, and I was probably 16 or 17 at the time. So you were maybe, you were probably close to 20 or 21, and you were sitting, you gave your concert as you normally would on an artist bench. And I remember I said to my dad looked at me and he said, you're going to be as good as Michael someday. And I looked at him and I said, well, I can't play that well unless I have that kind of bench.
Oh.
That's what I said to him. And literally about a week later, I came home and there was the bench. Dad had bought a piano bench, an artist bench that went up and down, like a fancy piano bench. And I was like, oh God, I'm screwed now. Now I have to really practice because he got me the bench.
So if it weren't for that, I wouldn't have had you as competition.
Well, I don't know about that, but that bench was always a joke because that showed up, the next week, and it was really funny.
Oh, that's a great
that was
story.
our father. Yeah. So our lives have all intertwined in a long, fascinating way.
Oh yeah. Well, everybody, thanks again, and I hope you enjoy this show. Okay.
Thank you.